Everyone, how are we all today? That's good. That's good. Today was got a bit of an interesting one for you. Steve asked me to do today because he's away at the camp, and a few other people are too. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Cyclone Gabrielle. For those of you who don't know, until last year or the year before, I was in the Army Reserve. I was in the regular army when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and then I skipped over the reserves, and when they had the cyclone in February 2023, I went back over to Napier to sort of help out a bit because I was still in the army at the time. So Cyclone Gabrielle was all over New Zealand. It happened here probably. It was certainly in Taupo where we were at the time, and there was damage in Whanganui and Auckland, but quite particularly in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. In fact, out of interest, the week before, there was actually a cyclone in Gisborne area, and I went up there for, I can't remember what we went there for, Cole. I might have been, that's right. Okay, because my dad died, we buried him in Tolaga Bay. And you know, my cousin showed me, he said, do you want to see some flood damage? I was like, oh yeah. And so we drove to this bridge and we just saw all these logs and destruction and stuff, and I thought, man, if someone had told me that you could get that level of destruction, I wouldn't have believed it. Well, the next week I was proved very wrong because it was about 10 times worse than that a week later. So, bit of facts on Gabrielle. Sorry, I'll turn my back because I can't read that far. 546 mils of rain over 24 hours. In the Esk Valley, where most of the damage was, they reckon it was about 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools getting dumped every minute for 12 hours straight. In the valley, the loss of power, water and phone services to 70,000 residents. There was 19 deaths. In the aftermath, there was 5 bravery medals awarded mainly to policemen. And there was a state of emergency in place from the 14th of February to the 14th of March in the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne region. And so it brings to mind this when you see a level of destruction like that. But God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom and stretched out the heavens by his understanding. When he thunders, the waters in the heavens roar. He makes clouds rise from the ends of the earth. He sends lightning with the rain and brings out the wind from his storehouses. Jeremiah 10, 12 and 13. And you could certainly see, I assure you, the power of God, or that is to say the destruction of nature at the time. Pretty much every bridge in Hawke's Bay was destroyed. What made it worse was that the weather people had predicted the worst of the weather to be in central Hawke's Bay. So most emergency services and heavy equipment were sent to Waipuck. Then all the bridges were wiped out and everything in Napier had no services in it because they were all on the wrong side of the bridge, quite literally. You can see where the silt has sort of come up, right up to people's houses, and people were climbing into their manholes and into the cavity of their roofs. And so later on, search and rescue and the army were going around these sorts of houses looking in roofs for people because some people were in there, some people were able to kick their way out, and unfortunately some people did not escape. And so that's the sort of stuff we're looking at. Roads, this is a valley. Roads all wiped out, and people just completely unable to leave where they are or get to their loved ones. And so this went on the night of the 14th. Well, it might have been the night of the 13th and early hours of the 14th. But, eventually it stopped. And who shuts up the sea behind doors when it bursts forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in the thick darkness. When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place. When I said, this far you may come and no further, here is where your proud waves halt. That's Job 38. So it's a reminder that even in all that, when God says stop, stops. And you can see the limit of it. This is from the road. That's my cool arrow. That is where the water went to, and this is from inside a truck. So it was quite high. You can see the fences. I didn't put it up because it's probably not appropriate, but when I got there, in a lot of places, all these fences were all filled with sheep, like fish in a net. They're all, they couldn't escape either. So it wasn't just people, it was also animals who couldn't get away. Interestingly, just on those sheep, in the news, there was sort of news that there was a bit of a conspiracy going around that thousands and thousands of people were dead and the government were hiding it up. So what they did is they had a helicopter flying around with thermal imagery, and they could see what they thought were thousands of human-shaped infrared under all the thing, but it was in fact sheep that had been, and it was about the same size as a human body, and that's where the confusion came from. But in the early days, yeah, people didn't really know, and you know, when things like happen like that, the truth isn't always relevant. Good stories are cool. So you can see again the silt, that's a layer of silt, that's how high it went up. This is in the Esk Valley, in here, and so that's just been cleared away by diggers in the main roads. But yeah, you can see how hard it would have been to get to people in the early stages of the disaster. That there's the railway that goes from Napier to Gizzy. It was just completely, I think they've just pulled it all out now, but it was just all gone. There was, and cars sort of tipped over, there was a lot of that kind of thing, just all washed away. So you could see the power of the river, and you could kind of understand how people must have been feeling, people who lived in the floodplain. They were just completely, the flood banks were just completely overwhelmed. So isolation, despair and hope. I guess like in a disaster like that, those sort of things happen, and it certainly happened in that way. People woke up to find, because the next day was more or less glorious, but just this level of destruction, people caught out, I know in our own house, in our own family, we had our trees all fell over on our driveway, and it took about an hour for me cutting and another person cutting toward us just to get out of our driveway, and that was just wind damage. We had no flood at our house. And there was many people who were caught up in that, and then the emergency services could only spread so far, so they kind of work on trying to get to most people. So the more isolated you already were, the more isolated people ended up being, because they were, not because they weren't special, but you got to try and get to as many people quickly as you can. There was a lot of despair. People's houses were destroyed. People were trapped. People had no one to be able to communicate because there was no power to the cell phone towers. And then they got emergency generators, but they only last about 6 hours. And then there was no way to get fuel to them. So then no one had phone either, or internet. But there was hope though, and the hope was that people, well, one is God is always with you, if you were close to Him. Two, other people were coming towards them. And I couldn't help think about this image of Daniel in the lion's den, by himself, had despair, but he gave his troubles to God, and hope came of it. He had hope, and he was rescued. So this is, you can see that man there's actually my cousin, just by coincidence, named Sean Andrews. He just lives up the road from here. Because I'm from Hawke's Bay, just so you guys, those who don't know it. This is the Dartmoor Bridge, and you can see it's just completely washed away, all these trees. Like the trees were just banking up on the river, on the bridges, and then they just couldn't hold it anymore, and just shot away. And that happened to, I think, 14 bridges. There was one bridge to get into Napier left. And all the train bridges were washed away, which you know, people don't realise, but a lot of transport from ports is by rail. So that all came to a halt too. Here's a picture of Pātoka and Puketitri. So my family's from Pātoka. My grandfather had a farm there and my dad used to work for him. That's how he met my mum, because he just didn't stick to himself. And so I lived there for a while. When we were first married, Nicole and I were in Pātoka and in Rissington down here until we left the area. I was in Pātoka Fire Station for a while and then Rissington Fire Station. So I knew the area quite well, and the army used me for that because I knew. But you can see in this region, the reason I bring it up, the red is State Highway 1 and the blue is all the roads, but there's no road into these areas. So this whole region, there's about 5,000 people in there completely cut off. There's a bridge gone there, bridge gone there, bridge gone there. So here's another community isolated from both ends. And the main Rissington Bridge, they had been there since 1920, all gone. So these people were completely isolated with no way in, and the army had to figure out what they were going to do about that. Most other people had access, albeit slow to get to, but you could still dig. So that's an example of a road, just a country road in Pātoka. In fact, if I go back, that actual slip is this bit here, where I don't know if you can see my circle, but that is, so you can have a nice as road all you like, and then you come across something like that, and it's completely washed away. So you can imagine the sense of isolation. You got babies and things, you need to go somewhere, and then that's what you see at one end, and then you see a bridge like that at the other. That's the Rissington Bridge. That's what it normally looked like. And see how far apart the stream is. Not very wide. There's a man, it's only a few feet wide, but as you see, there's the bridge there, and that's how wide it had all come across. And so these wires, what they are, is that wires that the army engineers put up to try and at least ferry essential things over to the people in Rissington. Here we come to the Dartmoor Bridge. You'll see this is where that man was looking over before. That's where this is, but you know the days have come nice now. This is my friend Daniel Sanson. He decided to make our little boat. He gave it a name, the USS Get Across. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but this is Dartmoor. You can see this line that's across in a boat that's attached. So what happened is that a few days after it was actually this day that this photo was taken, was when that boat was put across. So there was some photos going around, and there was a bit of a heroic story once about me, because I tied this rope around my waist and kayaked it across the river. But it was actually this day. So there was a photo of the dirty river and me with this thing around. It looked all great. But in reality, you can see how clear the sky was and how calm the thing was. And these little girls, well not little, but they were about 14 years old, had already paddled their kayak across, and I simply borrowed their kayak and just pulled it across with the rope. And the only reason it hadn't already been done was because no one turned up with a rope big enough yet. And it was as simple as that. And so if you hear any historic stories, they're not really true. I just simply paddled across. Interestingly enough, for about 2/3 of the way across the river, I could feel my paddle hitting the ground because the silt was that high. So the water was actually only about that deep, apart from in a bit of a channel here. So that was the first instance of, you can see the trapped people on the other side coming down to get supplies. And that was our boat, and we just ferried things across. So that, you'll see that how far the water's gone down. That's the same spot, that's where those cars were. Go back, that's where they are. The water had gone down quite a lot, and that was probably the 17th, so that was 3 days later. So water comes quickly, but if it's not inhibited, it leaves quickly, but it leaves its destruction behind for considerably longer. Yeah. So there's our boat again. Oh, that's how it was attached. That's actually me helping this lady across, but we just had it attached to this clip, and she sees she's sitting on all the boxes of supplies. We just loaded it up with just food as best we can and just pulled it across by hand. These are my little cousins. These little rat bags all went across one day to take supplies over, and they'd got themselves across to play with their mates. So I took that photo of, we sent it to Nicole to show Nicole that they were still all right. Rissington Bridge, this was probably a bit worse. It was probably not as long, but it was more strategic of a bridge for the community. Things had to be carried. You can see at the background there, the diggers starting to work on a causeway. This photo was probably taken about a week after the flood. And you can see the locals here had started getting their little boat, and they were just ferrying stuff back and forwards. And that was the only way they could do it. They started getting a bit tired because what was happening was that the people who lived all the way up in the hills were kind of leaving it to the locals around the bridge to do it. So the people were coming down, getting all the supplies and leaving and not helping at all. And these people started getting a bit tired. And that's something that we noticed within human nature, is that for the first 3 or 4 days, everyone was concerned with their neighbours. And then after that, they started getting a little bit more concerned for themselves. And then about by day, sort of 2 weeks, it was starting to get pretty selfish out there. Believe it or not, the biggest fights that we had, and there was a request for the army to guard, was supplies of dog food, because people were coming in and scrapping over the dog food to feed their animals. We had guys come up and ask us if we could arrange helicopters to take them back home, which we couldn't, but what had happened is that helicopters would evacuate them and they'd forget about their dogs and leave them in the kennel, and then they'd be gone for like 2 or 3 weeks, and they'd remember that their dog is still in the kennel. But unfortunately, army helicopters aren't for rescuing dogs when there's still people who are trapped. So that was a bad thing that sort of happened. The other thing we noticed was that in town, as I said, there were 70,000 houses that were affected with no power. And when the army trucks were going through the day, people were pulling over, people were cheering and clapping, and they were all happy to see us. And when the power went back on in Napier, although in the town itself had power, nowhere else did. But to those people, the problem were over. And within a day, they were honking horns at trucks. They were upset that the army were clogging the roads because the problem was over for them. So they didn't see why they should now have to be put out for anyone else. And that was a sad thing for me to witness, just the selfishness of people. That problem's over for me, so it must be problem over for everyone. And that's where we as Christians need to be a light in the world. And it can be tough because if you're a Christian in that environment, your life isn't any easier than theirs. And there has to be a point, and I'm not sure where it is, where you look after yourself and your family and others. For a while, we were getting fuel across this river. I'll show you some cans later. But we were getting pretty angry because there were people still trapped. The army resources being used to get fuel over, and people had their generators running just so they could have their Wi-Fi and look at Facebook. The point of it was supposed to be to run your freezers for a bit, and then fuel was starting to run out so people could look at their social media, and that was a bit disheartening. The other interesting logistical problem about this area is we were with those boats. You can see the surf lifesavers. This is a few weeks later. The army would drop supplies on boats, and these surf lifesavers were just ferrying the boats across to give the locals a break. And we were getting 2,000 litres of fuel a day with other supplies just by those boats, carting them around. They managed to get a big bulldozer, I didn't get a photo of that, to drag a massive generator over the river, and they took it up to a substation in Pātoka, and they plugged it in, and everyone had power, so that was great. But the generator required 3,000 litres of fuel a day. So the problem got a bit worse, actually, didn't get better for a time being. So you see these jerry cans full of fuel, had to be army guarded because people were just pinching them. What happened? We had the army ones, we had hundreds of them, we were dishing them out, and people thought, man, these are cool, I'll keep these. And so they weren't coming back, and we were saying, oh, we need these fuel cans back because, you know, the army property. Oh no, Mr. Nobody knew where they were. So then one day we said, right, there'll be no fuel tomorrow until the cans came back, and the next day there were just piles of them up at the riverbank waiting to be, people would rather have the free fuel than the can. So this is how we did it. We just pretty much 24/7, even in the dark, we were just moving supplies into these boats, back forward, carrying them up to the top of the hill, because that was up there. So we had to carry them up there, all by hand. And that was the best system we had. Oh, this is the cemetery. The cemetery was covered in silt, and very good Samaritans were coming around and clearing around the grave sites for people. And that's when, and you know, so once people started getting supplies, they banded back together again. And so, you know, it reminds me of this verse, 2 are better than 1. This is Ecclesiastes 4. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labour. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So when people band together and help each other, and think of each other and care about each other and care about each other's needs, a lot more can be accomplished than if you just actually worry about your own need. Because, like, I mean, I don't know those of you who do have done much physical work, like building fences or shearing sheep or stuff, but you know, one guy can't do what 2 guys can do in twice the time. It takes more like 4 times the time. So we get there. So we started working and we figured out ways. We loaded helicopters with, this is a privately owned Black Hawk, loaded them up with supplies. They could hold a lot. They could hold about 2 tons of supplies, and they'll just fly it to isolated areas, mainly around the east coast. This is at the golf course, the racing course in Hastings. Load them up, off they go. We've already seen the boats. We figured out boats. Surf Lifesaving came, and all these people, all volunteers, started getting the boats across. Here's a bigger cage. You could also winch things across up there. Started figuring it out. Started building causeways. That's the Rislington Bridge. That's the boat there. It's not a good photo, but that's where they're going back and forward. Here they started building causeways. The silt was so thick but loose that there was 8 of those deep. We just put them down, they'd sink. 8 deep. And then, unfortunately, this causeway, there was another rain, and this all got washed away. We had to start all over again. Well, I mean, not we. I didn't drive the diggers, but I mean the people trying to get there. Diggers started building roads. The most valuable resource was diesel, and it was a rather interesting thing because the government at the time was trying to get rid of all fuel and have all trees, and the destruction was caused by trees, and the only way to fix it was to have diesel-operated vehicles. So that was a bit of a joke we had at the time. It still is a bit of a joke. Culverts. This here is the last culvert put in. I didn't really get had a good video of this, but I didn't have the technological nous to put it on this. But this is the last culvert to put in before we could reach Tutera. There was another isolated area that didn't get reached for a very long time. We got there and there was a policeman who lived there, and he was frazzled, man. Because he was a policeman, an off-duty policeman, but just because he was a policeman, the people just went and just looked at him. And he didn't seek the leadership, but he sure as hell got it. And then he started having gang trouble, and they started playing up while he was the only cop. And anyway, he was relieved to see other people come and help. And we got this. Took about 10 days to build this road to Tutera. And then the people on the state highway were digging away at it, and took 10 days to build this new road through farmland. And about the day after we finished it, they managed to get the main road open anyway. But you can't just sit down and leave people to their fate. So the army were building this road. And yeah, so you can sort of see, things were bulldozed aside. You didn't have to dig much. Just had to dig it. But people's cars were all destroyed. But it only had to be wide enough for an army truck. And then and then that's all you need. People couldn't come and go, but they could get their supplies. And the trucks would arrive, start unloading all these supplies in centralised locations like this. This is a wool shed. You can see that this community here, they just sorted their own selves out, and that's what most communities did. They used wool sheds and town halls, and then all the supplies were brought to a centralised point, and there was always, at each place there was some kind of matriarch who would shepherd all the supplies, and everyone was scared of her. Well, I kind of think of Anne in this situation, actually stomping around her wool shed, making sure no one took what wasn't theirs. But everybody got their supplies. There was one old duck, she's not in this photo, she's to the side here, but she was making pikelets. And she said, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just making pikelets. And I just said, you're doing the best job here. Because people, she didn't know what she could do, but she could lift people's spirits up. And they came in, they had nothing, and they could get a pikelet. And that was her contribution. So no matter how big or small our contributions are to society or to the kingdom of God, it always has a little bit of, like a big thing people can do is, I'm not really doing a lot, I won't do anything. And actually, if everyone did that, you actually get nothing, because even the people who do the big things need to be fed, right? So these people were, this is just an example, but they categorized, it was like a little store that was free. And people would come in, and you know what? Actually, most people, not always, some people were pretty bad, but most people were just taking what they needed, what little they needed, and everyone was getting fine. There was some cases of hoarding, unfortunately. I won't get into that because it's a little bit controversial, but there were some people who thought they deserved more than others for whatever reason, and they were hoarding stuff. One of my mates was the fire chief of Pātauga, and he was saying that he was offered a bribe of a free generator if he would let a bit more fuel go. And interesting enough, the generator wasn't even that guy's to give. He took it out of the supply stores and stuff. But yeah, there was sort of that kind of carry on, but most people sort of got a bit honest. So helping each other again. This is a big one for me, is the Fijian army, believe it or not, sent a contingent over. It's usually us sending stuff over to them, but I'll tell you what, man, if there's anyone who knows how to deal with cyclone damage, it's the Fijian army, because they know a lot more than our army knows about cyclones. Since they deal with, ours is big news 3 years ago, they'll probably deal with 4 of those a year. And these guys knew what to do, man, and they were great. So they came over and helped us, a contingent. This is a friend of mine, his name is Mark. Like I said before, I was from the area, so they attached me to the Fijians to be like a liaison between the communities and them. And because I'd already been in the Pātauga Fire Brigade, I knew most of those guys and the fire chief, and I was in the army, so I tied in with these guys, and it seemed to work all right for most of the time. Certainly, it was a great experience for me because, unlike the New Zealand soldiers, the Fijian ones are all staunchly, overtly Christian. And they would sing songs, Christian songs. They'd stop during the day and they'd just start singing. And that was their prayer. And it was very, very uplifting for me. And we had a padre attached with us. And so I greatly enjoyed it. I mean, I wasn't the only New Zealander attached, so there's about 5 of us. And the other 4 mumbled and grumbled. But I actually loved it, to be fair. It was very, very nice for me. First time experience for me to actually work in a secular environment with predominantly Christian people, so it was very cool. This is a house. You can see the silt that's come in from the hill and washed it all away and burst into that. And interesting, the reason I took a photo of this house, this was my auntie and uncle's old house. I said before that my mum and dad met on the farm when my dad worked for my grandfather, and it was just this farm next door. So it was interesting for me. And the Fijians come along and they help. We just got diggers were in short supply doing more important stuff. So we just got spades and we just a bit of elbow grease to get things moving. And we dug and dug. And we dug houses out. and got supplies to people. This here was a rugby game. We had the Fijian Army versus the local farmers, and we played a rugby match on the school at Pātoga, and there's me there sweating and fat. I was the referee, and although I won't take credit for taking the rope across the river, I will take credit for being the first person to referee an international rugby game in Pātoga. I feel there should be some kind of plaque about that, but NZRFU are probably still deliberating on that one. And I refereed very, very poorly because I had no chance of keeping up. Look at this. Look how thin these blokes are, man. I just penalties all the time. What's this for? So I can get there. So one thing we did have, I want to talk a little bit about, what's our time? Oh yeah, we've got time. I want to talk a wee bit about this, is that we had an impromptu church service. The community had, the next day, the rugby game, that day we thought, well, the Fijians, they were supposed to be taken back into Napier for church, because that was part of the stipulation by the Fijian government, is that on Sundays their soldiers were brought into town for church. So we said, well, why don't we have our own church in Pātoga at the hall? And it quickly became apparent that the hall wouldn't hold us all. So we used the school, the decking of the school, and the Fijians were all in on it. We had a padre with us anyway, who just so happened to be a Presbyterian pastor, army padre. We set up this little church. We found this table. I knew that this table was in the hall, somewhere stacked away, and from when we were in Pātoga, so we scrolled around and we found it hidden underneath maps and radios and things. Pulled it out, set up our tables, and we thought the day before, who's going to know? So we put it on Facebook and we rang around, and well, the next day there was about 200 odd people turned up. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, and none of them Christian, or not very few actual practicing Christians, but people just had enough. They just wanted something different than destruction. So here they start walking in. We had the Fijian Army guys as a choir. Again, I had a video, but I couldn't figure out, unfortunately, how to, because it's a lovely sound, but I couldn't figure out how to put it on the screen. I don't know that much about computers. So they all walked up in hordes, and the locals turned up. And here's our padre, our Presbyterian pastor padre. He was with us the whole time, and he led a very very well, given the time frame that he had to write a sermon, which was about an hour. He led a very great thing that was relevant and, relevant, my throat. Very great sermon that was relevant to and balance, taking into consideration that a lot of people are not actually Christians, but they wanted to come anyway. I actually think they wanted to come and hear the Fijians sing, because we said that was going to be the draw card, and it was. So why do we do that? Well, 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, and always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So we thought, well, we'll have our church service in Pātoga, and the Fijians were keen on that. Fijian commander was like, yeah, that'll be okay. We had an army padre from New Zealand, so that was fine. Interestingly enough, there was 2 draw cards. One was the Fijian choir, and the other was saying that we had a Presbyterian padre because all the Scots come dragging out of the hills to come and watch. We had one old lady, Agnes, an old Scottish lady. She was 86, and she travelled 2 hours through those roads to come to her church service. So she was pretty happy about that, and and he gave a great sermon that was, sort of directed. I don't have it on video. I should have, but I didn't have the foresight. But he just approached about resilience, that compassion is a choice. You can choose to be compassionate. You can choose not to be, and he did give a bit of gospel at the end. One thing about that, you sort of think, well, was that the right thing to do? Was it not? But you always got to share the gospel when you have the chance, because I'll tell you that about 10 days after this, a person that I knew personally, well, both Nicole and I knew them fairly well, a farmer who had all his bridges washed away on his bridge, he came to the service, he heard the gospel, and he unfortunately elected to take his own life about 3 or 4 days later. So you got to share because you never know. You never know. You never know where it will go. So yeah, that was. I hope that was good for you guys. It wasn't much of a sermon, but at least it was kind of what happened there. So that's the end of that. Yeah, what's the time? Right, well, we'll have a song, and then I'll give a benediction, and then please do stay for a cup of tea. Yeah.
Thank you, Brad.